last couple of weeks, because we've had people missing, we've had holiday breaks, so forth. What we're in the middle of is probably one of the most important sections on the burden of Babylon. And why do I say most important? Most important with regards to the book of Revelation. Because Revelation is about the judgment of Babylon, this figurative Babylon. I'm trying to show that they are the same. That figurative Babylon there in Revelation is this Babylon, that they are the same prophecies, that they are talking about the exact same event. And that they are figurative. And when we went through all of the verses in chapter 13 and chapter 14, almost none of those things apply to the fall of literal Babylon in 539 BC. It just does not happen that way. I'm not the only one to say that. Almost every single Bible commentator out there on Bible Hub, wherever you want to go, they call Babylon in chapter 13 mystical Babylon, spiritual Babylon, figurative Babylon. And then they will pick some of the verses in chapter 13 and chapter 14, and they will say, this definitely has fulfillment in the first century. This verse is definitely fulfilled in the first century. And I'm like, well, just make the whole thing fulfilled in the first century, and you've got a pretty sound theory. And what we did 2 classes ago is I went through the great trouble to show that Peter was in... Where was Peter? Come on. Where was Peter? Jerusalem. Where was Peter, the elder of the church in Jerusalem? Peter was the apostle to the Jews. Where was Peter not? Rome. And then he's writing this letter saying, hey, we elders here, writing to all these Christians up in Asia Minor, 1 Peter 5, 1 Peter 1, 1 Peter 5, he says, the elders here at the church at Babylon salute you, and my son Marcus. Remember, the apostles stayed there in Jerusalem. They were not part of that dispersion yet right away. Okay? Peter stays there almost his whole time until right before he dies. He is the elder at the church at Babylon. He is not the elder at the church at Rome. So then last week we started going through, I said, okay, that's where we kind of get the idea of this mystical Babylon is where Peter was an elder at. And we know he was an elder at Jerusalem when we went through all of the different list of activities, page after page after page after page, of him being the elder at the church in Jerusalem. So what we're starting to do, what we did last week, and I know half of you weren't here, and it's Christmas time, and we're not going to meet again for another 3 weeks after this class. But what we're doing is we're going back and we're plugging in Jerusalem, 1st century AD Jerusalem, in chapter 13 and chapter 14. We are saying that is what this mystical Babylon represents. And we're going through each of the verses and seeing if they fit. And what we've done is we've had the nation from afar is going to come as God's weapon. Does that happen to Jerusalem in the 1st century? Yes, he brings in the Romans. The day of the Lord, is it called the day of the Lord when he destroys Jerusalem? Yes, he says, I'm going to bring Elijah, the prophet, before that great and terrible day of the Lord. I'm going to bring John the Baptist before I destroy you. That's that one. The hands are going to be faint. Every man's heart is going to melt when Jerusalem sees their ultimate judgment coming. They're going to have the pangs and sorrows. Remember, we spent a lot of time on this one. Isaiah 13:8, the pains and sorrows are going to take hold of them as a woman in travail from her labor pains. And then you have Revelation 12:2 saying the same thing. They're going to lay the land desolate. We've read that many times in Isaiah already. And now the verse that we're on today is the one that y'all should be most familiar with. Isaiah 13:10. For the stars of heaven and the constellations thereof shall not give their light. The sun shall be darkened in his going forth, and the moon shall not cause her light to shine. This is the same heavens and earth. The sun, moon, and stars. This starts in Genesis chapter 37 in Joseph's dream. The sun and moon, this is the mom and dad, or dad and mom, of the Israelite nation at their beginning. And the stars, the 11 stars, are the tribal leaders, the sons, along with Joseph, but Joseph gets divided in half, right? Manasseh and what was the other one? Ephraim. That's what it's talking about here. The Isaiah chapter 1, verse 2, hear, ye heavens. And then in verse 9, hear, ye rulers. The heavens are the rulers, the leaders. Give ear, O earth. That was verse 2. Verse 9, give ear, ye people. The earth is the people of the Jews, and he's talking to Judah and Jerusalem. This is Judaism. This is the leaders and the people of Judaism. This book is the Messianic prophet, and he is talking about the transition from Judaism to Christianity. In Matthew chapter 24, we've spent a little time on Matthew chapter 24. One day we might make a whole big old study on just Matthew chapter 24. What happens right before Matthew chapter 24? What chapter? What happens in Matthew 23? Do y'all remember? You scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites, I'm going to destroy you, you hypocrites. You killed the prophets, I'm going to destroy you, you hypocrites. You rebelled against me over and over again, I'm going to destroy you, you hypocrites. He's laying into them like I've never seen it before. I'm going to end you Jews. I couldn't do it earlier because Christ wasn't in. Remember, they needed the sign. Ahaz needed the sign. Christ wasn't here. He couldn't have done it back a long time ago. But now Christ is there, and now it's fair game. And then he walks out, and the apostles are like, when are you going to do this? When are you going to end this age? When are you going to do all that stuff you just said? And they're looking at the temple, and they say, when is the end? Tell us, when is the end of this age, this Jewish age? Because they had been promised this better covenant. There's going to be a more perfect, a more everlasting covenant come. When are these things going to happen? When are you going to tear down that temple? When is the end of the Jewish age? Don't use your King James there, because it says world. It is a wrong translation. I'm not even going to say bad translation. It is a wrong translation. The end of the Jewish age. When is the temple going to be destroyed? And he starts talking about Matthew chapter 24. He says, you're going to see all these things. If you're out in the fields, don't come back in. If you're on the housetop, just go straight. Don't go into your house and get your stuff. Leave now, fast. Pray that your flight be not in winter. Pray that it's not on a Sabbath day, and we talked about that. They couldn't get out of Jerusalem because you weren't allowed to travel on the Sabbath day, so the city gates would be shut. Completely relevant if Matthew chapter 24 is talking about the end of the Jewish age and the destruction of the temple. Completely irrelevant if that's about the end of time. Why do we care? We don't care if the end of time comes on a Saturday, Monday, Thursday, doesn't matter. We don't care if it's in winter. It makes no sense. It's not talking about that. And here we have in Matthew chapter 24, it says the same thing that's happening to figurative Babylon. When it's talking about the destruction of the Jews there. Here it's a little more direct. Isaiah is a little more indirect. It's metaphorical. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, shall the sun be darkened? Shall the sun be darkened? And the moon shall not give her light? The moon shall not cause her light to shine? And the stars shall fall from heaven? The stars of heaven and the constellations, they're not going to give their light either? It's the same thing. And then a couple of verses later, he says, this generation shall not pass until all these things are fulfilled. The generation that he was talking to right there would not pass until this verse happened, figuratively happened. These things represent the leaders of the Jews. This is about Judaism being removed. The kingdom was being taken from them and given to the Gentiles. The Jews that converted and the Gentiles. And then we went over this in class 2. We'll go over it again a little more in a second. The powers of the heavens be shaken. And what does Hebrews 12:27 say? And when I say that word shaken, I mean removed. So many people are like, oh yes, he's going to shake the earth. No. He's not going to shake the ball of dirt with some water on it. That's not what's happening. It's not an earthquake. It's the fall of Judaism. The fall of the leaders, the king, the high priest, the Sanhedrin council, the Pharisees and Sadducees. Because if you go back to chapter 23, he says, all of this judgment is going to come upon this generation. And then in Matthew 24, he says it again. So he's not giving the Jews of that day this big warning, saying this is going to come on this generation, and then it doesn't come on that generation. But we all know it does come because they're wiped out by the Romans. Right? Joel, turn to Joel. Somebody asked if we could do Joel. Carol, that was you.
Yes.
You get your wish. And this is one of the easy ones, because when you get to Acts, they say, and that's really my next slide, but it says, hey, remember when Joel was talking about this? It is being fulfilled right then, there in the first century. They're like, we're living the fulfillment of Joel chapter 2 and chapter 3. We'll start reading in verse 28. And it shall come to pass afterward, I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh. And your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, your old men shall dream dreams, your young men shall see visions. When is that fulfilled? What chapter of the Bible?
Acts 2.
Acts chapter 2. After the resurrection of Christ, death, burial, and resurrection of Christ, the most important chapter in the Bible. So many prophecies are fulfilled in Acts chapter 2. It's the second most important event of all time. The whole timeline, and that's why I'm saying the whole Bible, I believe, is talking about it. I think it talks about one thing. Carol was talking to me before, and she's like, yeah, all the prophets seemed all disjointed. And I used to think that too growing up. Now I don't. I think they all say the same thing, and they're all super connected. They were getting the world ready for Christ and Christianity. That's what they were about. I think the Bible is about one thing. It's just got a lot of detail attached to that one thing. And also upon the servants and upon the handmaids in those days I will pour out my spirit. I will show wonders in the heavens and in the earth, blood and fire and pillars of smoke. If literal, that's kind of cool, but kind of weird. But if we're just talking about the heavens and earth that we've been talking about the whole time, the rulers and the people. Joseph's parents, Joseph's brothers, the leaders of the Israelites. Verse 32. Verse 31. The sun shall be turned into darkness, and the moon into blood before that great and terrible day of the Lord. Does that sound familiar? Because it happens to figurative Babylon. And I'm saying figurative Babylon is Jerusalem. And you'll read in here that they come and he's going to bring all nations into the valley of Jehoshaphat. Do you understand what the valley of Jehoshaphat is? The valley of Jehoshaphat is, here's Jerusalem, here's the Mount of Olives, here's the valley of Jehoshaphat. Jerusalem, Mount of Olives, valley of Jehoshaphat. He says, I'm going to bring everybody, the whole world, which is Rome, and I'm going to wipe out the leaders, the people of Judaism. You can read that in there. Verse 32, and it shall come to pass that whoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be delivered. For in Mount Zion, in the church of Christ, in this new version of God's kingdom, and in Jerusalem shall be deliverance, as the Lord has said. And the ASV says it better. It says, there shall be those that escape. The ones that were faithful, the ones that were Christians, the ones that call upon the Lord, the ones that converted to Christianity. There shall be deliverance. There shall be those that escape, as the Lord has said, and in the remnant whom the Lord shall call. Have we been over the remnant before? What are the remnant? So Christians. Paul in Romans chapter 9, he says, hey, remember when Isaiah was talking about the remnant? He's talking about us. He's talking about us here in the first century that are Christians. They were because they were all Jews at first, right? That little section that got peeled out were the ones that were going to be saved. Joel 3:15, y'all can read in between. It says the same thing. The sun and the moon shall be darkened, the stars shall withdraw their shining. Verse 16, the Lord shall roar out of Zion and utter his voice from Jerusalem, and the heavens and the earth shall shake. And when he says shake, he means removes. I'm going to remove Judaism, but the Lord will be the hope, so forth and so on. Oh, let me read verse 17 too. I didn't have it up here, but as I was preparing for this week, I thought it would be good to add that. So shall ye know that I am the Lord your God, dwelling in Zion, my holy mountain. Then shall Jerusalem be holy. So he's talking about judging Jerusalem, destroying Jerusalem, bringing all the world into the valley of Jehoshaphat to destroy it, to deliver this judgment. And then he's saying it's going to be holy. Well, he's talking about the New Jerusalem here. He's talking about the Church of Christ. Okay? And kind of the better clue of it is what happens at the end there. And there shall no strangers pass through her anymore. That should be screaming Ephesians chapter 2 to you. The strangers from afar, the Gentile nations, would be joined together. The two shall be made one in Christ. There's not going to be strangers anymore. Everybody, all nations could be a part of this spiritual kingdom. That's what that verse is saying there in Joel chapter 3. And we know it's not a well, Court kind of has this theory, and it's kind of, I kind of see what he's saying, but no. Because why? Turn to Acts chapter 2. This is not me saying it. Who wrote Acts?
Luke.
What does Luke say? I need somebody to read verse 16. 2:16. Acts 2:16.
This is what is spoken of through the prophet Joel.
What they were going through right then is what Joel is talking about. This is not Court Lawrence saying that. This is Luke, whatever his last name was saying that. Anybody know his last name? Huh?
The Greek.
Luke the Greek.
Yeah.
And it shall come to pass in the last days of Judaism, of that Jewish age, of the last days of that old covenant being God's kingdom,
And it shall come to pass in the last days that I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and daughters shall prophesy. And he's just reading Joel. I don't want to read it again. I will show wonders in heaven above, signs in the earth, blood, smoke, fire. The sun shall be turned into darkness, the moon into blood, before that great and notable day of the Lord.
So that was written 800, Joel was 800 years before Luke's writing this.
And Luke is quoting him.
Yeah, so,
They all talk about the same thing. And then Matthew chapter 24 quotes it, and Revelation quotes it. Are we to the Revelation yet? Oh yeah, this is what we close with on this topic. And behold, we opened the sixth seal, and there was the shaking of the earth because he needed to remove it. And the sun became black as sackcloth, and the moon became as blood. The Jewish king, the sun, was not going to be able to give its influence anymore. I say the moon is representative of the second in command. Who would the second in command be? I don't think the queen. That would be the stars. I would say the moon is the high priest. What happened to the high priest? Right? The moon became as blood. He's killed. He's not just light gone out. He's dead. They all die. All the stars die as well. That's what I think it means. And I think I've got plenty of evidence. I'm always on the Baylor football forums. My dad played for Baylor. His two brothers played for Baylor. And I'm always on there, and I'll venture over to the religion and politics section. And I started a thread on this stuff, just to see how the Baptists would come after me. And that was nice. I like all those guys. Okay? I mean, we're all real mad at the beginning of the year because we were terrible, and now we're good again or something. I don't know what's going on with our football team, but... And I posted it up there, and I was like, hey, I just asked a question. I didn't provide any proofs or anything. And they're like, no way, man, the heavens and earth are still here. How can you say it? And I'm like, well, since you asked. And so and I basically just cut and paste our slides, kind of. And I showed them, and at the end, the guy goes, one guy goes, dude, I've learned a lot. Y'all keep this going, and never said another word. And then the guy was going back and forth with it. He's like, you bring up some good points. I'm going to have to reread all this stuff. And that's the way it ended. I thought it was pretty cool. Because this heavens and earth stuff is kind of easy to prove once you take it all into account. It's all about the same stuff. All right, moving on to more we'll get back to the heavens and earth on the next slide. It comes right back in. Isaiah 13, 11, and 12, it's talking about how so many people were going to be killed. It would be super rare to find anybody alive. Does that happen to literal Babylon? Not even close. Not even close. Almost nobody was killed. According to Xenophage, according to Herodotus, according to the Cyrus Cylinder, all of your old historical, according to the Bible, right? Because nobody's killed with Belshazzar in the Bible. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen in Rome, any version of Rome. I'm not sure which Rome theory you have to argue against. Some will say it's the city, some will say it's the empire, some will say it's the Catholic Church. It's hard to fight that one because it's a moving target. But in no version of Rome does that happen. Where they're all killed. Their kids, I think the kids come up later. However, in mystical Babylon, in figurative Babylon, in Isaiah 13 and Jerusalem, they both have almost everybody killed. Josephus says 1.1 million, other people say less, but whatever. It was a bunch of people. It was a bunch of people. Oh hey, we talked about the heavens and the earth being shaken yet? Are y'all tired of that? You can't escape it.
It was like a fire alarm.
I'm not just up here so I can talk about the heavens and earth. The Bible just keeps going to it. You would be shocked at how much it's in there. It means something.
Something's gonna happen when the earth starts shaking.
I will shake the heavens, and the earth shall remove out of her place And let me real quick, I'm not going to take as much time as we did in Hebrews last time, because there's a handful of y'all that were not in here for class 2. The heavens and earth. So what happens in Hebrews chapter 11 is you have that Old Testament Hall of Fame of faith. And then at the end, or at the beginning of chapter 12, he says, but they did not see the promise. All these old faithful dead people, they were not, unfortunate for them, they were not able to see the promise. And then he says, that ye, talking to the people alive then in the first century, he says, but ye have come to the General Assembly and the Church of the Firstborn. You have come to this Christian age. You have gotten to see the new covenant, this new everlasting covenant come, where the Gentiles will be a part of it. And then at the end, Hebrews chapter 12, verse 26. This is for those of you that were not in there at that time. It says, whose voice then shook the earth. Not literal. I'm talking about the people of the Jewish kingdom. But now he hath promised, saying, yet once more I shake not the earth only, but also the heavens. I've got to bring down the rulers as well. I've got to, and he says in the next one, yet once more, this word, shaketh, yet once more signifieth the removing of those things that are shaken, as of the things that are made, that these things which cannot be shaken may remain. Christianity. He is removing Judaism. Joseph's mom, dad, 11 brothers, that covenant is being removed so that the Christian church, the church of the firstborn, the General Assembly, the unmovable, the eternal, the everlasting covenant can take its place. And there's some, not as much in the Church of Christ, but in other religions, what the kingdom is debated. When I was on the Baylor Forum, the kingdom was all over the place. It was hard for them to say what the kingdom actually was. They think we still haven't seen it yet. This verse right here says, talking about the people there in the first century, it says, wherefore we, Christians in the first century, wherefore we, receiving a kingdom which cannot be moved. It's talking about the church of Christ. It's talking about Christianity, the church of the firstborn, the General Assembly, the New Jerusalem, the bride of Christ. It has like 15, 18 names. It's called the church of Christ in the Bible like once, I think. But it's got a whole bunch of other names.
One of the Jewish priesthood eliminated because they wiped out all the records and so forth.
Yeah, I've heard that before. I really want to dig into it because Jews will say no, that didn't happen. So that is something I want
But
to
it
look
was
into
in,
one day.
You know, Jewish.
But what's there today? So a lot of people will be like, well, it's there today. That's not the Jewish kingdom that was the religious-based kingdom. That's like a bunch of leftover lineage bloodline people that got together and made a democracy, a republic, or whatever they are. But it's not the spiritual kingdom. It's not God's spiritual kingdom. They don't even have the temple. That's a big Muslim building where the temple was. The Dome of the Rock. And Jews aren't allowed to go into it, I think.
It was all ended.
Yeah, that the old covenant was done away. We know
All
that.
that's
We
not-
know the old covenant was done away.
No,
Otherwise, we're in the wrong religion.
no.
How are we on time? Got plenty of time. Children and old men, again, doesn't happen in 539 BC when the literal Medes attack literal Babylon. That doesn't happen. But Josephus, 5th century Talmud, they kind of describe the attack on Jerusalem by the Romans in 70 AD. That stuff does happen. Figurative Babylon, mystical, spiritual Babylon, represents Jerusalem, first century. All right, the Medes. Here we go. This is the one verse that actually is right. But it's not hard to figure out. It's like that elementary association game or whatever. So it's Babylon equals Jerusalem, then the Medes equal who? You got to find out X, which X equals Romans, right? This is type antitype, or pattern. Babylon, 6th century BC, is the pattern. Jerusalem, 1st century AD, follows that pattern, oppressing God's people, torturing, tormenting the oppressor. The Medes, likewise, they're the ones that come in and deal God's judgment to the tormentor. So the type, the pattern is the Medes. The Romans follow that type. This gets harder in chapter 19 because there's 3 parties involved. And I will go crazy slow. But you're going to get to chapter 19 and it's worse than 13. Because he's sitting there calling the Egyptians, hey, ye Egyptians, ye my people. What? I'm going to bring the Messiah and you're going to return to me. What? That makes no sense. So you will scratch your head very hard if you try to make it literal. We're going to go through the same exercise in chapter 19. I kind of had a little fun with this one. There's 2 different things you can look at here. And Babylon, the glory of the kingdoms, the holy, the set aside one, the one that everybody looks at in awe, the beauty of the Chaldees' excellency shall be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. Let's address the Sodom and Gomorrah part first. All over the Bible, including the very first chapter of Isaiah, which we keep referring back to. Hear, O heavens, give ear, O earth. We're not on that part again. For the Lord has spoken, I have nourished and brought up children, they have rebelled against me, except the Lord of hosts had left us a very small remnant. Yeah, y'all should know this stuff very well now by being in this class. This should make a lot of sense to you. We should have been as Sodom. We should have been like unto Gomorrah. The Jews, Judah and Jerusalem. Who's the book about? Judah and Jerusalem. Babylon, spiritual Babylon, was going to be completely destroyed like Sodom and Gomorrah. Does that happen to literal Babylon in 539 BC? Nope, not even close. Not even close. The most opposite you can get from that. The second part of this was that I thought was kind of cool, and our 2 history guys here maybe can help me on this. Tom, you might be able to help too on this. Was Babylon Chaldean? Where was the land of the Chaldees? Where was Ur? It's down here in this area. Okay? Babylon is up in this area. So it's not that far from it. Who else is Chaldean in the Bible? Abraham. Right? He's the Ur of Chaldee. That's where Abraham is from. So the Israelites, the whole nation has come through this promise through Abraham. They're Chaldean. The beauty of the Chaldees. I think this verse is, even though you could think, you could definitely apply it to Babylon, because Babylon is this holy city. I think it's just so beautifully, magically, metaphorically, really talking about Jerusalem. I'll look into that further, but I just figured that out or came up with that today as I was reading. That's why it's not on any of the slides here. Sodom and Gomorrah. Matthew chapter 10. If you're familiar with it, he's saying, go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Go to these people who haven't converted to Christianity yet and try to convert them. And what does he say about Sodom and Gomorrah? He's saying, hey, go to them, warn them, say to them, it's going to be more tolerable for Sodom and Gomorrah in the day of thy judgment than for that city, than for Jerusalem. Sodom and Gomorrah, Sodom and Gomorrah. Babylon, spiritual Babylon, in Isaiah chapter 13, is Jerusalem, 1st century AD. Matthew chapter 10, not necessary that we go through it, but it kind of gives you an idea just more of how the Jews are the target. This is just another chapter. This has to be like the 20th chapter I've gone to show the Jews were a problem. Beware of the Jews, verse 17, beware of the Jews that are going to scourge you in their synagogues. Matthew chapter 23 says, hey, you're killing my prophets and saints in the synagogues. Verse 19, hey, Christians, when you're put on trial, I'm going to give you the words to say. Brother will deliver up brother. Jewish brother who had a Christian sibling, they were gonna turn on each other. The Jew was gonna turn them in so that the Christian could be put to death. Parents were gonna be turning in their kids. All of this happens in the 1st century. Of course, this is Bible. This is Matthew in the New Testament, so it's not anything we have to figure out. Verse 22, they hate you a lot. The Jews hate you, Christians. They hate you. They're coming after you. They will persecute you in many cities. You'll have the chance to convert them before I come to destroy them, before I bring in the Roman army as the weapon of my indignation. This nation from afar, these strangers from afar, whose tongue you would not understand. Verse 28, don't fear the Jews. Don't give in to this persecution. Fear God who can destroy your body and soul. Don't fear them over me. Verse 34, Christ the conqueror is coming with a sword. We see him as the one, the Prince of Peace and all of that. He has to do this first, and then it's peace. It's peace inside the church after that. And I think this one is hilarious. Daughter-in-law against mother-in-law. Kind of makes me believe in millennialism because that one's still going on. But my mom, my mother-in-law, my daughter, none of them are here today. Church didn't have band concerts. First ever band concert. Whatever. 7th grade band, it's not good. The lost sheep of Israel, the Jews would be against anyone in his house that turned to Christ. Matthew chapter 10. We're going to be going through a few of these chapters coming up here. We'll go through Acts chapter 12 here when we get back to the new year. You can kind of go ahead and read that if you want. It's not something we've touched on yet. The unfaithful would never regain their inheritance. I'm going to not do a lot here on the inheritance because we get into it heavily in the back half. You get. We've already touched on it a little bit with the Ketuvah, with Tom, the daughter, the mother of Zion, whatever. She was having her heirs taken away from her. In the back half, it explains this a lot more, that her heirs are going to be replenished with the Gentiles. They're going to bring in so many tents, they're not going to have enough space for all the people that would come into the new kingdom, to inherit that new version of the kingdom. The dragons here, I've got a little part, this is just kind of my guess here, because it talks about the dragons in their pleasant palaces. The dragon, it's not important if I prove this or not, so I was even thinking about skipping it. Y'all can look, because I don't know if this is accurate. This is just my guess. But the dragons always represent the king of these big Gentile armies. Nebuchadnezzar is a dragon. Pharaoh is a dragon. There's one other one in there. I can't remember which one it is. I say Nero is the dragon in Revelation. There's a dragon, he's the one that spits out the flood at the church, but yet that Jewish woman soaks up the flood instead. They take the blow. So I don't think it's literal Babylon here. What happens is Jerusalem is destroyed by the Romans here too. The Jews try to come back in the 2nd century, like 2 more times, I think. And they lose like another 600,000 people and like another 500,000 people or something like that. Don't quote me on my numbers, but it's a lot. It's big 6 figures. They keep trying to come back to Jerusalem and rebuild it. Hadrian, who would qualify as a dragon, the leader of Gentile armies, he turns it into a Roman city at that point. He's tired of the Jews coming in and trying to redo it. So he then, somewhere in the early 2nd century, he turns it into this big Roman city, so they won't do it anymore. And who is Hadrian's adopted dad? Do y'all know? 2 history guys, y'all don't get to answer this. Too easy for y'all. Who is Hadrian's adopted dad? One of the best emperors of all time.
Is it?
No, he's 300s. He's 4th century. You know? I'll give you a hint. My son is named after him, Trajan. Trajan. What did Hadrian build? What is the most famous thing that Hadrian built?
A wall.
Built that big wall on Robin Hood. I think we're done. I think we're going to end early. I don't want to get into 14. 14 is fun. 14 is where all the commentators start saying, yeah, this is 1st century. This is 1st century. And I've got page after page of their quotes. So you can be like, okay, dumb old court is not alone.